Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today we have the astounding John Anthony Miller, author of historical fiction. And today we're going to talk about his story, For Those Who Dare. He's going to take us to East Berlin in 1961. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
And as a reminder, can you just tell us what was going on during the time that this book covers?
Okay, so at the end of World War II, Germany was divided. A free or capitalistic West Germany administered by the Allies, England, United States, and France. And East Germany was Democratic Socialist Party overseen by the Soviet Union. So Berlin, the capital city, was also divided east and west. And the book takes place in 1961, 16 years after the end of the war, the day that the Berlin Wall is constructed. So that was a wall to keep people from leaving East Berlin and going to West Berlin, which was a free society.
What's your background? Are you a full-time writer? Or?
Yes. By trade, I was a nuclear engineer. Now I write. That was my seventh book. Always loved history. Always used writing maybe as a stress escape from my job. And then 7 or 8 years ago, I thought, these things I'm writing aren't too bad. So I took an internet course and then another. And as it turned out, the instructor was an editor for Penguin in New York. And she was from Philadelphia. I live in a suburb of Philadelphia, New Jersey. And she offered to do one-on-one tutoring when she visited her family. So I did that for about 6 months, wrote my first book, and it was published shortly thereafter. Found an agent. I have a wonderful agent, Donna Eastman, Park East Literary. And I write and she takes care of everything else. So she's a perfect agent.
That is perfect.
Yeah.
But you are incredibly detailed with your research. So where did you go to research the events that unfold in this book? Because I don't want to give too much of the story away, but I loved it. Thank
you so much. I like to merge the location of a book with the characters and make the location a character. So I travel a lot. I've been to Europe 11 times, Germany 4 times, Switzerland 4 times, locations of this particular book. I've been to almost all the locations of my other books. Sometimes I'll go somewhere planning to set the book there and do the research, and in a subsequent revision, I might change the location. But I enjoy making the location as important as one of the characters.
I think that was really well done, the way that everything played together, finding out and being able to verify things that unfolded in the story, how people escaped, what attempts they used to escape, how East Berlin started to close down on so many of those possible escape routes, the conditions that they had to live under versus the complete modernism of West Germany. So,
correct. What I tried to do, the book is fiction, but the events are factual. It's just fictional characters immersed in them. And I tried to contrast the socialism of East Berlin, and there's different degrees of socialism. Arguably, it was communism in East Berlin, and the free enterprise and capitalism of West Berlin, which was thriving. And it was a magnet for people wanting to better their lives. And I tried to show that the different escape paths attempted are very similar to real life situations. Initially, when the wall was built, people could create fake passports and get out, and they cracked down on that. And then they realized that Berlin was a city, and the sewer system was routed into East Berlin. That's where the treatment centers were. So people realized they could crawl through sewer lines and get to West Berlin. And after a few were caught, that was closed off. They welded mesh covers on the under the manholes so people couldn't use that. So day by day, it became more difficult to get away. And there were a series of tunnels that were constructed, some successful, some not. But what really struck me as I researched the book, in the 27, 28 years that the Berlin Wall was there, 150 people were killed trying to get to West Berlin to experience the freedom that all of us enjoy and sometimes maybe take for granted. And that kind of spoke volumes to me on why I did the book. A society that would build a wall to keep their people in, and people that would risk their lives for freedom.
I know that was well developed. What I really enjoyed was the person not affected, the American that could leave. But I love the way that you turn the tale around. So it's like you're at that moment in time, that one chance where you have a chance to make a difference. Are you going to take it, or are you going to run?
Exactly. Right on the border and available to help from West Berlin was an American writer, casual acquaintance to the woman that's trying to escape from East Berlin prior to the wall. And that's the situation he's put in. He doesn't like commitment. He's unmarried. He travels around the world writing history books. And he's put in a position, do I help these people or do I walk away? And ultimately, he decides to help them.
Would you say the main character had attributes of you?
I did use my mother as his mom. I'm Italian, even though my last name's Miller. And this is one of the only books of the 8 or 9 that I've written where I used portions of me. So I used my cousin's address in Philadelphia, and I used my Italian mother as the model for his mother, which offers some humorous moments. But other than that, I guess every writer uses a piece of themselves in most of their main characters, whether you do it consciously or not. But I enjoyed writing the book. It was a lot of fun.
How long did it take you to write?
It takes me about 9 months to deliver a book to my agent. She's used to be an editor, so I'll send her something and she'll do a quick read for fatal flaws or anything like that. Sometimes she'll send it back and say, I really like this one character. Can you expand her? And so that process might be another 3 months. And so within a year, she's sending it off to the publisher.
Wow. when you traveled there, were you there to specifically investigate some of the aspects that you showed us in the book?
Yeah, each trip that I take, I have maybe 15 or 20 ideas for books and a couple sentence summaries in a file I maintain. And when I go to different locations, I keep the different concepts for novels in mind and look for opportunities to use what I see in one of the novels.
Wow. So with, I guess, the world building or the building of the city and how things took place in this book, it seems so real. Are those real streets? Is that really the edge? Did it cut through a cemetery the way it's explained in the book?
Yes, I do a lot of research. Of course, on a trip to a location, it's difficult to get that kind of detail. You're still unsure, or I am, what part of the city the book is going to be. But when I started to research, I normally start with about a dozen nonfiction books on the time period, what people experienced, and then I progressed to maps, a map of where the wall was, some real life stories of people that lived on the border. And I continually do that research through the revisions. I do multiple revisions, at least 5 or 6, before I send it off to my agent. And in each one of those revisions, I'll come to a paragraph or a scene, and I'll think, well, this could be a little more vivid, and I'll do more research.
I thought the authenticity was there, especially with the atrocities that happened with the young woman, with the way people were treated, what they were supposed to think and how they were supposed to act, all of that.
Right. It's difficult for us in a free society to imagine that people were actually treated that way, and especially the backdrop against the World War. I don't think we can imagine how horrible living through the war probably was. And I even had a reader sent me, an email critique and said, it's hard to believe that a society like this existed. I think you overdid it. Well, you can read it in history books like I did. It was just a horrible time in global events.
No, it was. But I think you did an exceptional job about bringing that out. The fight or flight that people were taking, the way that people were reined in, the way that people told on other people, the questions of what is it really like on the other side? Would it be nice for my family to have regular running water, electricity, like the simple everyday things?
I found that to be extremely interesting when I researched it. First of all, it's self-preservation always supersedes whether we want to admit it or not. And in situations like that, where you may see a neighbor do something or maybe not, but if you say something to the right person, maybe you do get hot water as a reward, or it's just a horrible society. And I thought it was important to shine a light on that.
Also, the way that you explain the escape, the rejoining of different families, and the torturous ways that some of them were torn apart, the surprising contributors.
Mm-hmm.
That was shocking. but so good. It just kept me tuned in. I had to read it twice.
I'm really glad you enjoyed it. What was so horrendous about the wall going up with no warning? Prior to that, people could live in East Berlin. They might have a daughter in West Berlin. They might work in West Berlin. And they crossed the border daily, several times a day. Their church might be on one side. And then very abruptly at midnight, one night, the wall started to be constructed and they couldn't see family. I have in my research, I found a heart-wrenching photograph of a young couple holding up a newborn baby up above. Originally, the wall was only 6 feet high, holding the baby up for the grandparents on the other side of the wall to see their newborn grandparent. And what that whole era did to families, it's just horrible to think about.
No, it really brings the horrors right to you. Also that thrill for someone to make it out. Anybody.
Yeah, there were a lot of successful escapes. As you mentioned earlier, they became more and more difficult. What started as a fake passport or somebody sweet talking a guard or paying off a guard and getting across the border, and eventually evolved to tunnels or very intricate methods of escape. And some of those were successful. My favorite research story, a group of senior citizens dug a tunnel, and I think 75 people got out. So,
seniors, all of them?
Yeah, it was a fun read, but it became more and more difficult. And after a few years, nobody really got out. Most of the attempts were unsuccessful.
It's such a good story. Thank you so much for sharing it. Tell me about some of the other books you've written.
Well, I wrote 4 books set during World War II and in exotic locations: Singapore, Berlin, Paris, Lisbon, Portugal. And the common theme to all of those, I wanted to put ordinary people like you and I into that situation where we just described with this book, where you make that decision: am I going to help or am I going to hide? And I think it's interesting to examine the human personality. I think we would all quickly find out that we're not James Bond, but I think most people have an inherent desire to help. And that's the basic theme for those. Then I wrote 2 historical mysteries. They're set in the 1920s. One is in Lake Como, right after World War I. And as a backdrop to that, I wanted to show the horrors of the war. And so each of the main characters is scarred in some way from the events of World War I. And then the other historical mystery I wrote was really a fun read. It's set in New Orleans in 1926. It's called Sinner, Saint, or Serpent. And it starts with the death of the murder of a ruthless businessman. And an investigative reporter is kind of shadowing the police, but the 3 suspects are prominent women in New Orleans society. So he dubs them, gives them the nickname Sinner, Saint, and Serpent. So the sinner was allegedly having an affair with the victim. The saint was a woman very active in charitable causes who lost control of her business to the victim. And the serpent was a very charismatic voodoo queen who was seen at the murder. So that was especially fun to write. New Orleans is another fun place to go to. I've been there 6 times. And I put everything from the local foods, the streets, to descriptions of buildings to try to make the reader feel like they were walking down the streets in New Orleans, just like the characters were.
Oh, that was great. What are you going to be working on next?
Well, my next book is with the publisher. It's called The Drop. It's set in Havana, Cuba in 1958 during the Cuban Revolution. And it's about the kidnapping of a wealthy American businessman. His name is Jimmy Foster. And the mastermind of the kidnapping, a brilliant revolutionary the woman named Ariana Rojas. And she meticulously plans every detail of that kidnapping. The one wrinkle was when the ransom note goes to the businessman's wife, she doesn't want her husband back. So it creates situations that none of the characters really planned. And that was another fun book to write.
Did you get to travel to Havana?
No, that's one location I didn't go to, regretfully, but I did a lot of online research. That book should be out, I would guess, next April or May.
Oh, wow. So you still have research to do? Or
no, it's done. There's a long timeline from the time my agent provides the novel to the publisher and to when they actually print it or release it. And the things that happen in that interim, or the cover gets designed, there's a grammatical edit and different layouts for the Kindle and for the print version that come to me to review and approve. So based on their what's in their queue for books about to be published, that determines the timeline. So I work with a couple different publishers because I tend to write quicker than they publish. Some of them have up to 18 months after my agent gives them the book before it comes out, and others are maybe 6 months. So it depends on the company.
Interesting. What advice would you give for people that want to write these type of stories, historical fiction? What are your rules for research?
What I've found through my readers primarily is they expect details to be right. It's not uncommon to write a historical fiction book and shift the timelines. For example, since we were talking about Havana, in the book Godfather Part 2, which takes place in Havana, the author condensed about 13 years of history into a few months to propel the story. And I think readers are okay with that, but they're not okay with not describing the streets or the cars or the clothes, getting the clothes wrong. I got the model of a rifle wrong in in one book, and the reader didn't hesitate to let me know, and I appreciate it. I appreciate the feedback. But that's the type of detail that you should focus on in your research.
I agree. I think that's really important. So you must have learned your lesson, because I couldn't find any flaws in this one.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you.
I did. And I when I read historical novels, I want the author to be true to the time period. I want factual evidence that I can go back and check to see how a story could have developed or how people lived at that time. You're right. The way they dress, what foods were available, what the culture was like. And you can see that you did that on both sides for this book.
Mm-hmm. I had to research how advanced West Berlin was to how unadvanced they were in East Berlin. They still hadn't recovered from the devastation from World War II.
No, and it was exceptional. You weren't overly broad with anything. You really drew us into the era, the action, the story that's unfolding, people's dispositions, the people that they were wary of and why. And some of those people will never understand, but you gave us really good insights into all of the characters that were at play.
Thank you. It's a scary political environment when you can't trust family, neighbors. I can't imagine having to live that way. It must have been very, very difficult.
Absolutely. Any other tips for young people that are interested in a writing career?
One tip I got from one of my favorite authors, James Michener. He wrote in the 60s and 70s, and for his books, the main character was the location. His books are Alaska, Poland, Hawaii. But I read his biography, and he said, if you're going to be a writer, at least for that first draft, whether it's you just sit down at your computer and start typing, or you do an outline or a summary, do it uninterrupted. Do it every day. Because that momentum, at least to capture your overall plot, is important, and it's difficult to recapture. And his quote was, if you're an author and you get sick and you're too sick to write, don't be sick for longer than a day. So that I work every day, sometimes an hour, sometimes a lot. I go to family functions and things like that, but I don't like to break the momentum, whatever revision I'm working on. In between revisions, I'll take a break. But I think the reader can see those interruptions. They're not intended, but when that momentum loses steam, it impacts the overall book.
Great advice. Thank you so much for sharing so much about what you do. We're looking forward to your next release. And in the meantime, keep asking questions. And if you want a great story and historical fiction, check out author John Anthony Miller. You won't be disappointed.